Okay. So,
Series, right?
I want to frame where we are in the chronology of the Jews leaving Egypt, because it is relevant to today's discussion. So I think it's always a great idea, but it's relevant to today's discussion because some people, especially when we get into the Jews leaving Egypt, and people know, perhaps in the back of their minds, the page number will be page actually 132. According to this one. That the Jews were in the desert for 40 years. They figured, you pace it in the Torah, you figure you're going to play it out the 40 years over the course of the Torah. It doesn't work that way. The bulk of it, of the Torah, of the text is very front loaded. So if you think about it, in the beginning of the second book of the Torah, we have the Jews in Egypt and the process of freeing them, which is morning. Take the one to the left on your way out. Table for two right here. Oh, there we go. Okay, put this up for us. That's it. So we got.
I like the
We have more chairs. You're good. Bleachers, yeah, okay. David asked if we're gonna have enough room. I said, sure.
Is there a date, Jewish date, when the Jews arrived at the Sinai Mountain?
So you want to talk about that on the Jewish calendar, the Jews, and again, so I want to get the chronology down because it is going to be relevant today. The year is 2448, when the Jews are liberated from Egypt. Okay, the whole saga of the Passover and the plagues, the whole thing, let's say, there lasts 10 months to 12 months. So it's 2448 is when they get out. So starting from the beginning of the second book of the Torah, 2447, 2448, they get out of Egypt. I'm going to shut that door because we have preparing for a bas mitzvah. So that's 7 weeks later. We're still in 2448. Then we have a saga of the golden calf and Moses going up 3 times on the mountain for 40 days and so on. He comes down with the second tablets, Yom Kippur. Okay, so now it's 2449 because the year flips on Rosh Hashanah. So we're still in the second book of the Torah. And then in the second book of the Torah, the day after Yom Kippur, again it's 2449, the Torah, God tells Moses we should build ourselves a tabernacle. Tabernacle is going to be a place for connection with God, and it's going to be, we'll really be able to re-experience the intimacy between the human and the divine that we had at Sinai. We got 4.5 Torah portions devoted to everything that goes on in the tabernacle. The command, the accounting, the deal. So by the end of the second book of the Torah, we're still in the 2449 area, but we're building up to the opening of the opening day of the tabernacle, which is going to be the first day of Nisan. Jewish calendar is different than ours. There's a beginning of the years, and there's a beginning of the months. Years turn over in September. The Hebrew month is called Tishrei. Beginning of the monthly cycle, the holiday cycle starts in the fall with Pesach. The month of Passover, called Nisan, and the Torah says explicitly this will be the first of the months. So it's a little bit awkward in the way because we have a much more seamless system for our usage in our secular calendar. So now they're approaching the first anniversary of Pesach, and it's 2 weeks before, and that's the opening day of the tabernacle. Okay, it's still 2449. The entire third book of the Torah we're still there. Okay, they're in the Sinai desert. Mount Sinai, they can see. They built themselves a tabernacle. They've been camped, a few million people, been camped in that area of the Sinai desert. They haven't moved. And that whole book of the Torah, third book of the Torah, chronologically, as far as it's if it's not that day, it's within those days. It's that area of time. Fourth book of the Torah, we take a leap forward, a month. So it says, and we say now it starts on the first day of the second month of that year. In other words, they just finished the first anniversary of the Exodus. Right? That's how the fourth book of the Torah opened. And we're not getting there yet. Soon it's going to leapfrog to like the 38th year. We're not there yet. But that's just where the Torah has us. If we're following along chronologically, that seems to be where we are. We've had opening day of the tabernacle. We've gone through the first anniversary of Passover, and the Jews are getting ready to move in the desert. Now, one thing which is very relevant to today is when God tells the Jews, it's very explicit in the Torah, when God tells the Jews as they're leaving Egypt, said, this is the Passover holiday, the whole deal, and the matzah, the thing that we talk about every year by the Seder. What God says is, you're going to eat matzah now, as you're about to leave Egypt. And in the future, when you get to Israel, you will celebrate Pesach. And there's going to be a Passover offering and the whole deal. So Pesach, there's a lot of the Torah is for implementation immediately. Kosher, Shabbos, whatever is there. Some of the stuff clearly can't be done in the desert, like the agricultural mitzvahs. They didn't have fields in the desert. That's for sure when they come to Israel. Some of the offerings they do there in the desert. They have a tabernacle. They've got animals. They've got everything they need. But for whatever reason, God says for Passover, that you'll do when you get to this. That's clearly in the Torah. It's not. It's in the words. You can see it. Okay. Now, let's go to we're going to explore just before we get it. Again, the path of this curriculum of Torah studies, which I think is a good one, is we pick up an area of a Torah, of something that's in the Torah portion. We want to explore it, but it's really there's a lesson, a larger lesson we're getting out of it. It's not just understanding the Torah portion; it's understanding something. Now, this is a lot of the last time we met also, I think, was about leadership. And today is also going to be about leadership. And it's about the responsibility of a leader to those being led. The absolute responsibility. Okay. So now let's get back to the Torah portion. In this week's Torah portion, the Torah tells us, text 1a, God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in the first month of the second year of their exodus from Egypt. Oh, thank you. Didn't do this yet. Thank you very much. I didn't even get started with it. Okay. Oops. Sorry. Just get this out of the way. Okay. So it says, God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in the first month of the second year of their exodus from Egypt, saying, the children of Israel should bring the Paschal offering in its appointed time. So this is really a curious verse. Number one, this is the third Torah portion in this fourth book of the Torah. I told you the fourth book of the Torah, we went all the way to the second month of that year. of that 2449. In other words, the second year they left Egypt. And now, for some reason, in middle of this week's Torah portion, we go back. He spoke to them on the first month of the second year. For some reason, the Torah, and it happens, but the Torah is disjointed time-wise. We started off the book saying God spoke to Moses in the first day of the second month of the second year there after leaving Egypt, and now we go back and say he spoke to him before Pesach. What did he say? Bring the Passover offering. I just told you before that God told them that you bring the Passover offering, you celebrate Pesach when you get to Israel. For whatever reason, God says, I'm going to make an exception this year. This, for the first anniversary, you also bring a Passover offering. That wasn't in the plan. Because when they left Egypt, they were told, when you get to Israel. God says, you're not in Israel yet, do it anyway. Okay. Now, and indeed, again, in the Torah portion we're going to read Shabbos, it says the children of Israel brought the Paschal offering in the Sinai desert in the afternoon of the 14th day of the month where they were supposed to, that's Passover. And they did it in accordance with all that God had instructed Moses. So they are surprised by this mitzvah. They weren't expecting it, but they did it. And in text 1c, we find the Medrash telling us, because if you think about it, it says, the children of Israel brought the Paschal offering in the Sinai desert after Moses. Of course they did. We just read that God said, do it. God, the boss says, you do it. The Medrash says that the Torah is underscoring that the Israelites, they jumped into action. This was said in praise of the Israelites. They did it precisely as Moses has instructed. Because if they're thinking about, I mean, I don't know what kind of a social calendar they have there in the desert, but if they're thinking about their month ahead, and they didn't have the Passover offering and the whole Passover exercises, if that was not on the plans, got to change the dishes, whatever. God says, surprise, Pesach this year. They were very happy. Sure, let's do it. And even more so in the Torah portion we're going to read, and in the times of the temple, there was and I don't want to get into this too much, but we probably have touched upon it. There was a concept of ritual purity and impurity. So let's say one of the things that the Torah tells us is that as important as it is, it's a mitzvah to help bury someone. It's an important thing, a special dignity for those who passed on. Having contact with the dead is something a Kohen shouldn't do, because the Kohen representation of the divine is that's life, and the whole idea of death in the world comes from the separation between us and God, the way the Torah describes it. So a Kohen can only be part of a funeral for immediate family. So a rabbi being a Kohen is actually, it limits the job. It's really, I know friends who are rabbis and Kohens, but it's not easy. I have no limitations. Now, what if we lived in the times of the temple and I had a funeral today? Of course I would go to the funeral. But I couldn't bring an offering. I couldn't go into the temple precincts or whatever for a few days. I have to go to the mikveh, whatever. That's his life. But of course I would do it. But it could limit my partaking of sacred foods, of being in the temple. Not a temple like here. I'm talking about like the real temple. So what happened? God says, surprise, you're going to bring a Passover offering. Some people say, whoa, I'm not in shape. I just did a funeral. So they were not able to do it. Says, text 2, several men were in a state of ritual contamination by virtue of contact with a dead body, and were thus unable to bring the Paschal offering on that day. So, you just can't do it. That's what the law says. But they weren't happy with that. They want to play by the rules, but they approached Moses and Aaron on that day. And they said to Aaron and Moses, we are impure, we are by virtue of contact with a dead body. We didn't do anything wrong. There's no moral deficiency. It's actually a good thing we did. Why should we lose out, be unable to bring the offering to God among the children of Israel at the appointed time? Why should we lose out on the privilege of an offering when we didn't do anything wrong, we did something right? The answer would be, life is like that. Life's not fair. It's okay. You're not penalized. It's just you can't do what you can't do. But they pushed for it. They valued the Passover offering, and they pushed for it. And so, before we go to text 3. So what happened is, I thought they had the text here, so I'll just tell you what it is. The Torah tells us, and we may have explored that once here, there is what's called the second Passover. There's a makeup day. You don't have makeup days for other offerings. It says this is the second Passover. Anybody, for history, anybody who had a situation where they couldn't do the Passover offering, a month later, usually the Passover offering is brought on the 14th day of Nisan. The month after is called Iyar. On the 14th day of Iyar is called Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. Until this day, there is a tradition to recognize Pesach Sheni. We have keep some shmur matzah to the side after Pesach. Literally, just say there's Pesach Sheni. What does it mean? It used to mean. There's nothing we're doing now, and nothing gets from today gets pushed off from Pesach to Pesach Sheni, from Pesach A to Pesach B. But it was something historically. Obviously, there's something that is special to the day. God granted them that. So this was an example of human initiative turning to God and saying, "But I want the mitzvah." And God's saying, "Okay, I'm not going to change the rules on impurity, but you'll have another chance in a month from now." Okay, that's all great. But it brings us to another question. If this happened on the first day of Nisan, why are we putting it here when chronologically we already spoke about, we opened the book with the first day of Iyar, the month after? Why is it out of order? And especially since this is such a beautiful story, start the book with a beautiful story. This chronologically, this story belongs in the beginning of the fourth book of the Torah, not in the third Torah portion of the fourth book of the Torah. Follow? Got my bookkeeping? Good. Let's look at text 3. The fourth book of the Torah starts, as I mentioned before, on the first day of the second month of the second year. I told you the name we usually call it by, which is Iyar, but in the Torah it goes by numbers. So the first day of the second month of the second year after the exodus from Egypt, God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in the 10th of Mendy, saying, "Count the congregation of the children of Israel by families, following their fathers' houses, a head count of every male according to the number of their names." So the fourth book of the Torah, which has been given a name by the Christians, Numbers, there's a reason it's called Numbers. It's because it begins about numbers. It's about censuses. So the Torah, the fourth book starts with God saying, "I want you to count the Jews." When? First day of second month. Okay, what we had this saga before about I want to have a chance to do the as Passover was first day of the first month of the second year, right? So the fourth book of the Torah starts with the first day of the second month. So why do we not begin with the story of hey, I want to you surprise us with the beauty of doing a Passover offering, even though we were supposed to wait until we go to Israel, but we just did a funeral. Why can't we do it? So the easy answer is text 4a. There's a Talmudic principle that is clearly here. The order of events in the Torah is not chronological. The Talmud makes clear Torah is not a history book. It's a book of instruction, which happens to be framed in chronological events. So, but the chronology is not the point. Chronology is a framing. And sometimes we make the point of instruction more in better. It's more effective when we don't do it in purely tell stories in purely chronological order. Most of the times it goes chronological. And as Nachmanides writes, text 4b, the entire Torah is in chronological order, except for those occasions when the Torah specifies that the dates are out of order. Even in those cases, it's for good reason and proper purpose. So here, we have kind of a weak answer, which is anytime something looks like it's out of order, say, listen, the Torah's out of order. The Torah doesn't go in order. Well, why not? As Nachmanides says, it usually does. For what reason would we take this nice story about the Jews pushing, saying, I want to be able to bring the Passover offering? Why would we place it later out of order when we could have opened the book with it? And especially since we find a pattern that the Torah always, when it comes to the opening, there are some Torah values that you find if you look in the narrative. When we start speaking, you always want to start with positive, and you always want to end with positive. What goes on in between? Sometimes you got to break a few eggs. But the fact is, you want to start off on a positive note, you want to end on a positive. And through the Talmud also. The endings are always either there's something with peace or love or God, something good. You want to leave a good taste in the mouth. And it goes to the beginning too. So, for example, how does the Torah begin in Genesis, in text 5? It starts off, before we get to text 5, actually, the Torah begins with creation of the world. So, sure.
So, is this the first example of people asking for something of God and God making a change?
It is the first example that first open example scripturally. There's also going to be in a few Torah portions, women pushing for some type of equality in inheritance. And God saying, and Moses saying, I got to check with the boss, and coming back and giving them the law that the daughters inherit. So these are the two starkest examples of, like, it doesn't seem to be in the rule book, and because of human initiative, we go back. God says, I was waiting for you to ask that, and here it is. He doesn't say I was waiting for you to ask that, but he must have been, because he knows everything, right? Okay. So what happens in the beginning of the Torah? Beginning of the Torah, it begins with creation. And the first question that our primary commentary, Rashi, asks is, why do you have to tell us this? It's not a history book. It's a book of instruction. Start with mitzvahs. A, do this. Number 2, number 3, take orders. Why do we start with the whole narrative? God creates the world, and also the unfolding of our patriarchs and matriarchs. So Rashi in text 5 says that the whole deal in describing creation, text 5 is for one purpose. Should the nations ever accuse the Jews of stealing Israel? Imagine that. Who would have thought? In case someone's going to come along and say, hey, this didn't belong to you, it belonged to the Canaanites, the land of the 7 nations, the Jews will respond, the whole world belongs to God. Look at the Torah. The whole world belongs to God. God created it and gave it to the people he chose. It was his choice to gift it to them. It was also his choice to take it from them and gift it to us. So God's in charge. So what does that mean? I don't want to get into that now. That's a big, especially on, it's a great, because today's the Israel Day parade, but it's not, I don't want to get into that part now. What the Torah is saying, what Rashi is saying is, the Torah begins with creation to understand, so that we understand that God loves us and created a world. And this world was created where God is giving all of humanity, and giving us specific things. And therefore, even though it's not a mitzvah per se, the Torah begins with creation in order so that we begin the Torah by understanding that God had us in mind in the creation of the world. So it's an expression of love. The second book of the Torah, the third book of the Torah, they're not brought in here, but those are also it's one looks at those and say God, the Torah opens the second book and the third book also with expressions of divine love for us. What about the fourth book of the Torah, which I said is a census? The census is kind of boring. What does that have to do with love? So text 6. As the Rashi brings here, God counts the Jews all the time. You know why? Because God loves them. And as Rashi will say there, it's not brought here. Say when someone who values their money will look from time to time, or more than time to time, just to check, where they're up to, because it's valuable to them. They want to see it. Something that's valuable, you check your wallet, you count, you want to make sure everything's okay, and it makes you feel good. That there's a security there. So God counts not his money, he counts his Jews. When they emerged from bondage in Egypt, God counted them. After they worshipped the golden calf and many died in a plague, God counted them, determining how many had survived. The tabernacle was erected on the 1st of Nisan, that's the first month of the year, and indeed on the 1st of the following month year, God counted them again. So, counting is an expression of divine love. So, that's why, so we say, so on one hand, you say, God, the fourth book of the Torah opens with an expression of love. Now, but text 7, it could have opened with something that was also an expression of love, but made sense chronologically. Text 7, this is from the Rabbi. God issued, as I told you before, he issued a special commandment after the tabernacle was erected, from which the Jews were otherwise exempt in the desert. The Passover offering. The Jews had been told, you do the Passover offering now as you're leaving Egypt. You're not going to have to do this again until you come to Israel. Not so surprised you can do it now in the desert. They were exempt. And this demonstrates their greatness and God's love for them. Then there is the fact that Jews fulfill this commandment perfectly. As we said, the Torah underscores, not, of course, you figure if God said to do it, they did it, unless we're told that they rebelled. But here, the Torah is explicit about it in accordance with all that God had commanded Moses, to show that we accepted that new responsibility, sudden responsibility, with joy, and we applied ourselves. Moreover, this story flatters the Jews by demonstrating just how much they're going to fulfill this commandment. Well, how does it flatter the Jews? Because we find that even those who were impure by virtue of contact with their body could not bring the offering, demanded and argued, and they were pushy, and they said, we want to have the opportunity to do this offering. Why should we lose out from bringing this offering in its appointed time? So it's actually a flattering story, and so God's love for the Jews is further expressed by the fact that God accepted the demand and treaties. Why should we lose out? It's even more flattering, the fact that God allowed himself to be pushed around. He granted them the opportunity to fill in the gap by providing a makeup date for the Paschal offering. So with that in mind, the central question of today's lesson is, why in the world did the Torah not begin with this story from this week's Torah portion, which chronologically should have been at the beginning of the fourth book of the Torah? It's a story that shows the love between God and Jews. Why did you push it into the third Torah portion? So actually, Rashi asks the question. Text 8. Why did the Torah not begin with the Paschal offering? Because it is a disgrace to the Jews that throughout the 40 years of their sojourn in the desert, they only brought this one Paschal offering. This is an interesting thing. And this is where we're going. the Jews, yes. Oh, no, I'm falling behind. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So this is, thank you for remembering that. You guys can online can also remind me if I mess this up. Okay. So the Jews come out of Egypt. They've done a Passover offering as they're leaving Egypt. In their minds, they're not doing one until they come to Israel. They accept it. As they approach the first anniversary, it's the second year after leaving Egypt, God says, surprise, you got to bring the Passover offering. They accept it. They do it. And historically, third year, through the 40th year, doesn't happen again. Why doesn't it happen again? Because they didn't have to do it. They're exempted. God didn't surprise them. So they have other things on the agenda. This, Rashi says, it doesn't reflect well on them. Why? There are some things they couldn't do, like the agricultural laws. That's it. I don't have. If you don't have a house, you can't put up a mezuzah. If you don't have a field, you can't give of the field to the poor. I don't have a field. Nothing I can do about that. But offerings I can bring, and offerings they are bringing. Why didn't they say, "Hey, we'd like to do this"? Especially once God said, "Hey, you can do it on the first anniversary," and some people can't, and they didn't relax, and they came and said, "Whoa, we want to be able to do it," and they got their way. Wouldn't it make sense that year 3 they say, "Hey, boss, can we do it again?" No. Moses says you wait till Israel. Why should we wait till Israel? We can do it here. We like it. It's a sign of our connection with God. It's not like the mitzvahs that we're just physically unable to do because we don't have a field. But they didn't. And that doesn't reflect well on their yearning to do the mitzvahs, to be as connected as possible. They had a list of, this is what we have to do. Fine, we'll do it. What we don't have to do, don't make a tumult, don't attract too much attention. We're okay with it this way. Right? Again, I don't know how busy they were in the desert, but the fact is that they weren't looking for new responsibility.
So how do you provide offerings since God took care of everything while they were in the desert?
Mhm.
Took care of the food, clothing, cleansing, etc.
Yeah, but they had cattle. So.
They had a cattle that brought from Egypt.
Yep.
So that was the only source of offerings.
Yeah, I'm sure the cattle were also propagating. Okay. So, and they were definitely doing offerings then. It says that's clear in the Torah. Different offerings, for sure. They were doing offerings. The Passover offering they didn't have to do. Okay, there was a perpetual offering every day, an offering in the morning, offering in the afternoon for the community.
But since you don't produce anything outside of cattle, you can do like 10% tithe.
There was a lot they couldn't do, and if you can't do it, you can't do it. But they could have brought tithes from their cattle. But I was talking about agricultural stuff, right? So what you can't do. But here they could do it. So they say they were exempt. Exempt, if you take a look at text 9, this is from a great rabbi of the 16th century. He says you want to distinguish between being exempt from a mitzvah and saying you did the mitzvah. If you're exempt from a mitzvah and you didn't do it, you didn't do anything wrong. You also didn't do anything right. You just did. An exemption from a mitzvah is not equivalent to doing a mitzvah. It's not so you did it. When we say one who is unable is exempted by God, we mean that there's no punishment. That's it. You didn't do anything right. You didn't do anything wrong. Nevertheless, it's not the same as doing the mitzvah and receiving the merit. Here too, though they were exempt, it was a missed opportunity. If there's for whatever reason, it's an anniversary and the spouse is tied up, whatever, all day, and you can't reach them, and so you didn't wish them happy anniversary, We both understand you're exempt. You couldn't be done. But it's not like, ultimately the flowers and the chocolate weren't given. Yeah, there is something. I'm not to blame for it, but it didn't get done. The Paschal lamb is different from all the other commandments that were not obligatory in the desert. Those commandments were only activated when they entered Israel. Those commandments, like that, the agricultural ones, it was only possible when they entered Israel. The Paschal offering had already been offered in the desert once before, so it could be done in the desert, and the Jews were exempted in the ensuing years. Therefore, missing out on this mitzvah is considered a loss despite the exemption. It's not a transgression. You didn't grab an opportunity to say, something, I want to say I love you through this Passover offering. Okay. So we're missing out on a positive creating positive energy. So that is what Rashi tells us is the reason that God did not put this story at the beginning of the book of the fourth book of the Torah, because he wanted to do something positive, and positive is that God's always counting us like people who like to count their money. And if I'm telling this story to a child and I'm reading with them the fourth book of the Torah, I say, look, now we're starting the fourth book of the Torah. It starts with the census. Census is exciting. Why is the census exciting? Because it means God's counting us like people count their money. God loves us like his riches. Cool. What if we start with the story that Moses surprised them with the second opportunity with the opportunity to do the Passover offering, and those who couldn't do it pushed back, and the kid says, wow, they loved it. What happened the third year? The fourth year. So they say that's what Rashi's saying. We didn't want to get into this because it's not on the first surface of it looks great, but once you probe deeper, not so great. Because why didn't they do it further? So that's why the Torah pushes it further in and doesn't begin the fourth book with what should have chronologically made sense and is a nice story on its face. And at text 10, as the Rebbe says here, even a child wonders why the Jews didn't demand the Paschal offering during the 39 subsequent years in the desert. Why didn't they say, why should we lose out? Why did they not tell God that they wanted to bring a Paschal offering? Especially since they knew this offering saved them in Egypt and brought about the redemption. It was a reminder. I mean, this is the generation, they knew what happened. We're sitting thinking back something, I'd say it's 3,325 years or 24 years or 3,200 to make a difference. It's ancient history. But for these people say, our parents, our grandparents, we went through this. We were slaves. We were going through a Holocaust. It was horrible. And then God took us out of this unbelievable stuff, splitting the sea. It's a time to celebrate. And God loves us. And it's reciprocal. If you feel you're loved by God, it triggers a love back. So why wouldn't they want to re-experience that? When a mere handful of Jews demanded, why should we lose out? God indeed granted them the opportunity to bring the Paschal offering. If all the Jews would have pleaded for an opportunity to bring the Paschal offering, we can assume God would surely have consented. Therefore, Rashi is telling us, in the next page, is that it was therefore disgraceful that throughout the 40 years of their journey and sojourn in the desert, they only brought this one Paschal offering. First one on Pesach, as they're in Egypt, and then there's one the Passover in the desert, and then done. Had they demanded of God, why should we lose out? They surely would have succeeded and been permitted to bring the Paschal offering during this 40 years. So, in other words, it is that is the reason that the story is not brought at the beginning of the fourth book of the Torah, where chronologically would have made sense and indeed would have added something. But now there's another question here. This isn't just a study of the narrative and why one thing fits in another. We want to talk about, here we're focusing on the beauty of leadership. Question, text 11 is, where was Moses? Talking about your average Yankel and Esther in the crowd. They got enough to worry about. They weren't looking for an offering. Okay. Who's looking for more responsibilities? But at least Moses, at least Aaron, does stand up and say, I mean, they were spiritually connected people. Why didn't they say to God, if it worked year 2, let's do it year 3. It's good for us, good for the people. So here's the Rebbe's answer on this. Text 11. Jewish leaders are primarily and completely invested in thinking about the people and doing things for the people. Moses even risked his life for the Jewish people. He didn't merely risk his bodily life. He also risked his spiritual life. He said to God, if you don't forgive the Jewish people, erase me from your book that you wrote. In case we don't remember that episode, it's a beautiful episode, and it's certainly I bring it up probably too often. After the golden calf, God says to Moses, they did this 40 days after Sinai. This isn't working. We're going to start this over. I'm getting rid of them, the Jewish people. I'm going to start a new nation from you. It's not working. We have this face-to-face. Once in a history thing, I show myself to the people see me. There's no question. They know exactly what's going on. 40 days later, they're building a golden calf. They can't behave. What does Moses say? Moses says, I'm asking you for forgiveness. And if you're not going to forgive them, erase me from your book. I don't want any part of this. Moses wasn't saying, God didn't tell Moses you're a problem. He's saying to Moses, we're in management. These people, forget about it. I'm going to start over with you. You're my only loyal guy. Even your brother Aaron over there was a little shaky. So now we're going to start over. You're a good seed. We're going to work with you. And Moses says, I want no part of this. No, what do you mean we? I'm with them. I'm with the people. They're down, I'm down. You got this holy book, great. Find someone else. Take me out of it. That's gutsy. It's also, but for Moses, who understands that there's physical life and there's spiritual life, there's divine life, saying take me out of your book means I know that this can have eternal ramifications. I'm okay. I'm not leaving my people. I'm not going to let you trash them and somehow I'm going to escape unscathed. That's called leadership. And so along these lines, so text 12, what would have happened if Moses and Aaron pleaded to God, please, let us do the offering again. Had Moses and Aaron pleaded for the privilege of offering the Paschal lamb, it would have been granted to them and to all the Jews. However, this would have compounded the disgrace of the Jewish people. It would have demonstrated that the Jews could have secured the privilege of this offering with a simple request, but didn't. Sometimes with doing a good thing, you can show up people around you who aren't doing the right thing. Take a crazy example. Today's my mother's birthday. Imagine I was with my brother and my sister in Morristown all day doing things in the house, and no one mentioned the birthday. And it comes 2:00 in the afternoon. And all of a sudden I say, hey, Ma, today's your birthday. Happy birthday. My brother, my sister is there. Yeah, we knew that. Or the right thing would be to do is go over to them and say, I just realized today's Mom's birthday. So otherwise the contrast is not going to be flattering. So Moses and Aaron pushing for the privilege was, those guys, they remembered. But the rest, no one else is doing that. So they prefer to keep quiet and let it pass rather than make the Jews looked at. To preserve the people's dignity, these faithful shepherds forewent the spiritual gain they could have accrued by pleading for and bringing the non-obligatory offering. This is a very central idea of looking at what leadership means Torah-wise, is that even though Moses and Aaron could have created an opportunity for a Passover offering, even though they could have created a mitzvah opportunity for the Jews, they were committed to the dignity of the Jews, and that was a priority, or the priority. What brings to mind is, and we'll see it as we finish this also, there's the chief rabbi, former chief rabbi of Israel. Today's chief rabbi is there's two chief rabbis in Israel, Ashkenazic and Sephardic. The Ashkenazic one, his name is Rabbi David Lau. His father, may he live and be well, was a chief rabbi before him. His name is Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau. He's an incredible figure. He's a Holocaust survivor. He's 86 today, and he's literally a giant of a man. He's a giant of a man outside physically also. And he's actually coming to the Rabbinical College a week from today. He comes in for our ordination ceremonies. He should live and be well. He and his wife. So he has a story that I've heard from him several times. I assume he's got his Rolodex, but especially because when I see him, it's usually for these rabbinic ordinations. Rabbi Lau's father was a rabbi in a very strong Jewish community in Poland called Piotrków. And prior to him had been a very famous rabbi, as the rabbi of Piotrków. His name is Rabbi Meir Shapiro. Rabbi Meir Shapiro is the one who, if any of you have followed along, comes into the news from time to time, there is this practice amongst many Jews of studying one folio page of Talmud a day called Daf Yomi. That was his idea back in the 30s, 40s. I don't know exactly. And he was a very well-known rabbinic leader, and he was the rabbi in Piotrków. And there had been many, which had a distinguished history of rabbinic leaders. So Rabbi Lau relates that when Rabbi Shapiro was hired as the rabbi of Piotrków, he was 18 years old, 20 years old. I can't remember that part. He said, and a lot of people didn't like it. First of all, he's a kid. Second of all, he came from a Hasidic family, not Chabad, no Hasidic family, and there's a Jewish community. It's us and them. We split ourselves into many different slices, ways. So the people who weren't Hasidic didn't like it. There was a struggle in the community. Meanwhile, the people overwhelmingly they voted him as the rabbi, and he was brought in as the rabbi. His first introduction to the community, people gathered in the town square, and Rabbi Shapiro gives a speech. And finally, after he finishes, someone from the back raises his hand, a wise guy, and says, Rabbi Shapiro, I want to know, I have a question. Do you believe in the resurrection of the dead? The resurrection of the dead is one of our 13 principles of faith. It's axiomatic faith, so it's an insulting question. The Rabbi Shapiro says, yes, I do. He says, so let me ask you, Mashiach comes today and there's a resurrection of the dead, and we have our distinguished rabbis in the history of Piotrków coming up, being alive. Who's going to want to talk to you? Where's it? How do you envision? How would you feel if you're standing, you as an 18-year-old stinker, with such a distinguished people? So he said, Rabbi Shapiro said, that's a great question. The beautiful the thing about the resurrection of the dead is it's not just for rabbis. they'll have their congregations, and I'll have you. So it's not going to be a problem. He said, but what if it's in years to come and none of our congregation merits resurrection of the dead in future years? He said, then Rabbi Shapiro got very serious. He said, if my congregation doesn't merit resurrection of the dead, I'm not going back either. So and he tells it to the students to understand what it means, what leadership means. That the loyalty. Well, it's also, but it's the loyalty to the people. Even though say you can save yourself, that's not the point. So what they inserted in here was something which was very interesting, because in looking at what it means to be a Rebbe, which none of us have ever been, it's not an honorific. It's really the idea is that a leader exists really just for the benefit of the people. And as a matter of fact, the Rebbe's wife, whose father had been a Rebbe, and she was the second daughter. She had an older sister, an older brother-in-law. I know from firsthand people who she spoke to after her father passed away. She didn't want her husband to become the Rebbe because she knew that Rebbes don't have a life. So she said, "Take my brother-in-law. Let it be him. I want to have a life." She wasn't selfish. She wanted to be able to breathe. Ultimately, the Rebbe became the Rebbe, and many years later, there was a lawsuit where over the Rebbe's library that there were heirs outside of Chabad who wanted it's a priceless library. They wanted to take some of the books. And the Rebbe said it all belonged to his father. It's community property. It's not personal. It doesn't belong to him. Doesn't belong to his wife. Doesn't belong to any heirs. It belongs to the community because it's his father-in-law, and everything that belonged to his father-in-law belonged to the community. So she was deposed. So in text 13, Nathan Lewin, who's a Jewish constitutional lawyer, is quoted here. He says because he represented Chabad in this. The lawyers asked, "Didn't your father own things? His library and his books, weren't they his personal property?" Oops, sorry. And she answered, "No." Oops, I did that again. Oops, okay, thank you. So she answered no. Surprised, they said, "What do you mean when you say no? Didn't the Rebbe have personal property?" She responded, "No. My father, the Rebbe, he was the property of Chabad. He belonged to Chabad, and there was nothing that he had himself personally." That's the way she saw it. And that is the way he lived. So that's an example of that type of leadership. So now, going back to Moses, let's take what the Torah says. Moses did not make it into Israel. He really, really wanted to go to Israel, but he didn't go in. Why couldn't he go in? What did he do wrong already? Is Moses, after all he did, just let him go in, then let him die there. But he wanted to just set foot in the land. So the Talmud asks, Rabbi Simloi, Rabbi the Talmud expounded, why did our teacher Moses desire to enter? So, first of all, why do you want to keep going there? Why did he keep wanting to go? Why was he so insistent that he wants to go? He didn't get it, but why was he so insistent? Was he desirous of its fruit or of its bounty? No. Rather, this is what Moses was thinking. The Jews were given many commandments that can only be fulfilled in Israel. I want to enter the land and fulfill them all. Let me just get into the land, taste what it means to fulfill Torah and mitzvahs in Israel, and then I'll die. So in 15a, we have a narrative of a conversation between God and Moses. God said to Moses, "How can you desire to enter Israel? Why would you go to Israel? Think about it. This can be compared to a shepherd who led the king's flock to the grazing ground, and the flock was captured. And he comes back without his flock. When the shepherd sought to enter the palace, he was denied entry. The king explained, if you enter now, what will people think? You stole the sheep." Said this isn't a good idea if you just walk in, because you left with the king's flock, so you came back without it. They're going to think that somehow you stole them. So that's somewhat of an analogy here too. God said to Moses, is it praiseworthy to lead 600,000 Jews from captivity in Egypt, bury them all in the desert, and lead a new generation into Israel? What happened was that the generation that came out of Egypt, they rebelled against Moses and they repudiated the land. So anyone who was above 20 at the time, which is the age of punishment, he said, you didn't want the land, you're not going to have it. You will die in the desert. And that's what the Torah says. You're going to die in the desert. So that whole generation from 20 and above, they had to die out. So you buried them in the desert. And now you're going to lead a new generation into Israel. People will say that the generation that was buried in the desert has no share in the world to come. They're debris. They unplug themselves from God. They're gone. Rather, he tells Moses, remain by their side. You be buried with them. And be buried with them. Only enter with them when they will enter in the future. There'll be a resurrection of the dead, as I mentioned before, and they will enter in the future. Scripture therefore states, you will not bring this congregation, meaning rather you will lead the congregation that emerged from Egypt with you. You're not going to lead this congregation, the younger generation of Jews into Israel. You will lead your generation, but at the times of Mashiach. So what God is saying to Moses is, you came out with a generation, they're all dead, you buried them, and you made it in. How's that look? You stay with the people. When they're ready to come in, you'll come in. And indeed, in text 15b, finally we say Moses' response was, dear God, this is quoting Moses, may Moses and 100 like him die, rather than harm a single toenail of the people. So I accept it. I was buried in the desert. I don't want to impugn the dignity of my people and leave them behind in the desert. I'm together with them. Captain goes down with the ship. Key points. Bringing the Paschal offering in the desert was a dramatic love story between God and the Jewish people. Number two, it also highlighted the disgrace of the Jews, for they never brought another Paschal offering in the desert. Number three, though they were not instructed to bring the Paschal offering, it would most likely have been permitted had they asked. Number four, Moses and Aaron would have asked for the opportunity, but they held back because that would amplify the disgrace of the people. And finally, true leaders belong to the people. They never entertain bonus opportunities for personal growth that come at a cost to the people. So,
Who led the Jews to Israel?
we speak a little louder so we can hear.
Who led the Jews to Israel?
Joshua led them. Shortly after Moses passed away, which was right before Purim, 7th day of Adar. There was 30 days of mourning, and then just in advance of the next Pesach, they came into Israel.
24:18 or 87?
2488.
You remember all these dates? How many
Not all these dates.
How many grandchildren do you have? You remember this?
What I had for breakfast yesterday, not so easy. All right.
But they all come to visit.
Yeah. Can't forget him. All right. Have a great week.